In the Hemlocks, John Burroughs, Part 2. Everywhere in these solitudes I am greeted with the pensive, almost pathetic note of the wood pewee. The pewees are the true flycatchers and are easily identified. They are very characteristic birds, have strong family traits and pugnacious dispositions. They are the least attractive or elegant birds of our fields or forests. Sharp-shouldered, big-headed, short-legged, of no particular color, of little elegance in flight or movement, with a disagreeable flit of the tail, always quarreling with their neighbors and with one another, no birds are so little calculated to excite pleasurable emotions in the beholder or to become objects of human interest and affection. The kingbird is the best-dressed member of the family, but he is a braggart, and though always snubbing his neighbors, is an arrant coward and shows the white feather at the slightest display of pluck in his antagonist. I have seen him turn tail to a swallow and have known the little pewee in question to whip him beautifully. From the great crested to the little green flycatcher, their ways and general habits are the same. Slow in flying from point to point, they yet have a wonderful quickness and snap up the fleetest insects with little apparent effort. There is a constant play of quick, nervous movements underneath their outer show of calmness and stolidity. They do not scour the limbs and trees like the warblers, but perched upon the middle branches wait like true hunters for the game to come along. There is often a very audible snap of the beak as they seize their prey. The wood pewee, the prevailing species in this locality, arrests your attention by his sweet, pathetic cry. There is room for it also in the deep woods, as well as for the more prolonged and elevated strains. Its relative, the phoebe bird, builds an exquisite nest of moss on the side of some shelving cliff or overhanging rock. The other day, passing by a ledge near the top of a mountain in a singularly desolate locality, my eye rested upon one of these structures, looking precisely as if it grew there. So in keeping was it with the mossy character of the rock, and I have had a growing affection for the bird ever since. The rock seemed to love the nest and to claim it as its own. I said, "What a lesson in architecture is here! Here is a house that was built, but with such loving care and such beautiful adaptation of this means to the end that it looks like a product of nature." The same wise economy is noticeable in the nests of all birds. No bird could paint its house white or red or add aught for show. At one point in the grayest, most shaggy part of the woods I come suddenly upon a brood of screech owls, full grown, sitting together upon a dry, moss-draped limb but a few feet from the ground. I pause within 4 or 5 yards of them, and am looking about me, when my eye lights upon these gray, motionless figures. They sit perfectly upright, some with their backs and some with their breasts toward me, but every head turns squarely in my direction. Their eyes are closed to a mere black line. Through this crack they are watching me, evidently thinking themselves unobserved. The spectacle is weird and grotesque, and suggests something impish and uncanny. It is a new effect, the night side of the woods by daylight, and observing them a moment, I take a single step toward them when, quick as thought, their eyes fly wide open, their attitude is changed, they bend some this way, some that, and instinct with life and motion stare wildly around them. Another step, they all take flight but one, which stoops low on the branch, and with the look of a frightened cat regards me for a few seconds over its shoulder. They fly swiftly and softly and disperse through the trees. I shoot one which is of a tawny red tint, like that figured by Wilson. It is a singular fact that the plumage of these owls presents 2 totally distinct phases which have no relation to sex, age, or season. One being an ashen gray, the other a bright rufus. Coming to a drier and less mossy place in the woods, I am amused with the golden-crowned thrush, which, however, is no thrush at all, but a warbler. He walks on the ground ahead of me with such an easy, gliding motion, and with such an unconscious, preoccupied air, jerking his head like a hen or partridge, now hurrying, now slackening his pace, that I pause to observe him. I sit down, he pauses to observe me, and extends his pretty ramblings on all sides, apparently very much engrossed with his own affairs, but never losing sight of me. But few of the birds are walkers, most being hoppers, like the robin. Satisfied that I have no hostile intentions, the pretty pedestrian mounts a limb a few feet from the ground and gives me the benefit of one of his musical performances, a sort of accelerating chant, commencing in a very low key, which makes him seem at a very uncertain distance. He grows louder and louder till his body quakes and his chant runs into a shriek, ringing in my ear with a peculiar sharpness. This lay may be represented thus: teacher, 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 teacher. The accent on the first syllable in each word uttered with increased force and shrillness. No writer with whom I am acquainted gives him credit for more musical ability than is displayed in this strain. Yet in this the half is not told. He has a far rarer song, which he reserves for some nymph whom he meets in the air. Mounting by easy flights to the top of the tallest tree, he launches into the air with a sort of suspended hovering flight, like certain of the finches, and bursts into a perfect ecstasy of song, clear, ringing, copious, rivaling the goldfinches in vivacity and the linnets in melody. This strain is one of the rarest birds of bird melody to be heard, and is oftenest indulged in late in the afternoon or after sundown. Over the woods, hid from view, the ecstatic singer warbles his finest strain. In this song you instantly detect his relationship to the water wagtail, erroneously called water thrush, whose song is likewise a sudden burst, full and ringing, and with a tone of youthful joyousness in it, as if the bird had just some unexpected good fortune. For nearly 2 years this strain of the pretty walker was little more than a disembodied voice to me, and I was puzzled by it as Thoreau by his mysterious night warbler, which, by the way, I suspect, was no new bird at all, but one he was otherwise familiar with. The little bird himself seems disposed to keep the matter a secret, and improves every opportunity to repeat before you his shrill, accelerating lay, as if this were quite enough, and all he had laid claim to. Still I trust I am betraying no confidence in making the matter public here. I think this is preeminently his love song, and as I hear it oftenest about the mating season. I have caught half-suppressed bursts of it from 2 males chasing each other with fearful speed through the forest. Turning to the left from the old road, I wander over soft logs and gray-yielding debris across the little trout brook until I emerge in the overgrown bark peeling, pausing now and then on the way to admire a small, solitary white flower which rises above the moss with radical, heart-shaped leaves and a blossom precisely like the liverwort except in color, but which is not put down in my botany, or to observe the ferns, of which I count 6 varieties, some gigantic ones nearly shoulder high. At the foot of a rough, scraggy yellow birch, on a bank of club moss so richly inlaid with partridge-berry and curious shining leaves, with here and there in the bordering a spire of the false wintergreen strung with faint pink flowers and exhaling the breath of a May orchard, that it looks too costly a couch for such an idler. I recline to note what transpires. The sun is just past the meridian, and the afternoon chorus is not yet in full tune. Most birds sing with their greatest spirit and vivacity in the forenoon, though there are occasional bursts later in the day in which nearly all voices join, while it is not till twilight that the full power and solemnity of the thrush's hymn is felt. My attention is soon arrested by a pair of hummingbirds, the ruby-throated, disporting themselves in a low bush a few yards from me. The female takes shelter amid the branches and squeaks exultingly as the male, circling above, dives down as if to dislodge her. Seeing me, he drops like a feather on a slender twig, and in a moment both are gone. Then, as if by a preconcerted signal, the throats are all atune. I lie on my back with eyes half closed and analyze the chorus of warblers, thrushes, finches, and flycatchers, while soaring above all, a little withdrawn and alone, rises the divine contralto of the hermit, that richly modulated warble proceeding from the top of the yonder birch, and which unpractised ears would mistake for the voice of the scarlet tanager, comes from that rare visitant, the rose-breasted grosbeak. It is a strong, vivacious strain, a bright noonday song, full of health and assurance, indicating fine talents in the performer, but not genius. As I come up under the tree, he casts his eye down at me, but continues his song. This bird is said to be quite common in the northwest, but he is rare in the eastern districts. His beak is disproportionately large and heavy, like a huge nose, which slightly mars his good looks, but nature has made it up to him in a blush rose upon his breast and the most delicate of pink linings in the underside of his wings. His back is variegated black and white, and when flying low the white shows conspicuously. If he passed over your head, you would note the delicate flush under his wings. That bit of bright scarlet on yonder dead hemlock, glowing like a live coal against the dark background, seeming almost too brilliant for the severe northern climate, is his relative, the scarlet tanager. I occasionally meet him in the deep hemlocks and know no stronger contrast in nature. I almost fear he will kindle the dry limb on which he alights. He is quite a solitary bird, and in this section seems to prefer the high remote woods, even going quite to the mountain's top. Indeed, the event of my last visit to the mountain was meeting one of these brilliant creatures near the summit in full song. The breeze carried the notes far and wide. He seemed to enjoy the elevation, and I imagined his song had more scope and freedom than usual. When he had flown far down the mountainside, the breeze still brought me his finest notes. In plumage, he is the most brilliant bird we have. The bluebird is not entirely blue, nor will the indigo bird bear a close inspection, nor the goldfinch, nor the summer redbird. But the tanager loses nothing by a near view. His deep scarlet of his body and the black of his wings and the tail are quite perfect. This is his holiday suit. In the fall he becomes a dull yellowish green, the color of the female the whole season. One of the leading songsters in this choir of the old bark peeling is the purple finch or linnet. He sits somewhat apart, usually on a dead hemlock, and warbles most exquisitely. He is one of our finest songsters and stands at the head of the finches as the hermit at the head of the thrushes. His song approaches an ecstasy, and with the exception of the winter's wrens, in the most rapid and copious strain to be heard in these woods. It is quite destitute of the trills and the liquid, silvery, bubbling notes that characterize the wrens, but there runs through it a round, richly modulated whistle, very sweet and very pleasing. The call of the robin is brought in at a certain point with marked effect, and throughout the variety is so great and the strain so rapid that the impression is as of 2 or 3 birds singing at the same time. He is not common here, and I only find him in these or similar woods. His color is peculiar and looks as if it might have been imparted by dipping a brown bird in diluted pokeberry juice. 2 or 3 more drippings would have made the purple complete. The female is the color of the song sparrow, a little larger, with heavier beak and tail much more forked. In a little opening quite free from brush and trees I stepped down to bathe my hands in the brook, when a small, light slate-colored bird flutters out of the bank not 3 feet from my head. As I stoop down, and as if severely lamed or injured, flutters through the grass and into the nearest bush. As I do not follow, but remain near the nest, she chips sharply, which brings the male, and I see it is the speckled Canada warbler. I find no authority in the books for this bird to build upon the ground, yet here is the nest, made chiefly of dry grass, set in a slight excavation in the bank not 2 feet from the water, and looking a little perilous to anything but ducklings or sandpipers. There are 2 young birds and 1 little speckled egg just piped. But how is this? What mystery is here? One nestling is much larger than the other, monopolizes most of the nest, and lifts its open mouth far above that of its companion, though obviously both are of the same age, not more than a day old. Ah, I see the old trick of the cow bunting with a stinging human significance, taking the interloper by the nape of the neck. I deliberately drop it into the water, but not without a pang, and I see its naked form convulsed with chills float downstream. Cruel? So is nature cruel. I take 1 life to save 2. In less than 2 days the pot-bellied intruder would have caused the death of the 2 rightful occupants of the nest, so I step in and turn things into their proper channel again. It is a singular freak of nature, this instinct which prompts one bird to lay its eggs in the nests of others, and thus shirk the responsibility of rearing its own young. The cow-buntings also resort to this cunning trick, and when one reflects upon their numbers, it is evident that these little tragedies are quite frequent. In Europe, the parallel case is that of the cuckoo, and occasionally our own cuckoo imposes upon a robin or a thrush in the same manner. The cow-bunting seems to have no conscience about the matter, and so far as I have observed, invariably selects the nest of a bird smaller than itself. Its egg is usually the largest of the hatch. Its egg is usually the first to hatch. Its young overreaches all the rest when food is brought. It grows with great rapidity, spreads and fills the nest, and starved and crowded occupants soon perish, when the parent bird removes their dead bodies, giving its whole energy and care to the foster child. The warblers and smaller flycatchers are generally the sufferers, though I sometimes see the slate-colored snowbird unconsciously duped in like manner, and the other day in a tall tree in the woods I discovered the black-throated green-backed warbler devoting itself to this dusky, overgrown foundling. An old farmer to whom I pointed out the fact was much surprised that such things should happen in his woods without his knowledge. These birds may be seen prowling through all parts of the woods at this season, watching for an opportunity to steal their egg into some nest. One day while sitting on a log, I saw one moving by short flights through the trees and gradually nearing the ground. Its movements were hurried and stealthy. About 50 yards from me it disappeared behind some low brush and had evidently alighted upon the ground. After waiting a few moments I cautiously walked in the direction. When about halfway I accidentally made a slight noise, when the bird flew up and seeing me, hurried off out of the woods. Arrived at this place I found a simple nest of dry grass and leaves partially concealed under a prostrate branch. I took it to be the nest of a sparrow. There were 3 eggs in the nest, and one lying about a foot below it, as if it had been rolled out, as of course it had. It suggested the thought that perhaps when the cowbird finds the full complement of eggs in a nest, it throws out one and deposits its own instead. I revisited the nest a few days afterward and found an egg again cast out, but none had been put in its place. The nest had been abandoned by its owner, and the eggs were stale. In all cases where I have found this egg, I have observed both male and female of the cowbird lingering near, the former uttering his peculiar liquid glassy note from the tops of the trees. In July, the young which have been reared in the same neighborhood and which are now of a dull fawn color begin to collect in small flocks which grow to be quite large in autumn. The speckled Canada is a very superior warbler, having a lively, animated strain reminding you of certain parts of the Canaries. Though quite broken and incomplete, the bird, the while hopping amid the branches with increased liveliness and indulging in fine sibilant chirps too happy to keep silent. His manners are quite marked. He has a habit of courtesying when he discovers you, which is very pretty. In form he is an elegant bird, somewhat slender, his back of a bluish lead color, becoming nearly black on his crown. The under part of his body from his throat down is of a light delicate yellow, with a belt of black dots across his breast. He has a fine eye surrounded by a light yellow ring. The parent birds are much disturbed by my presence, and keep up a loud, emphatic chirping, which attracts the attention of their sympathetic neighbors, and one after another they come to see what has happened. The chestnut-sided and the black burnian come in one company. The black and yellow warbler pauses a moment and hastens away. The Maryland yellowthroat peeps shyly from the lower bushes and utters his fip-fip in sympathy. The wood pewee comes straight to the tree overhead, and the red-eyed vireo lingers and lingers, eyeing me with a curious, innocent look, evidently much puzzled, but all disappear again one by one, apparently without a word of condolence or encouragement to the distressed pair. I have often noticed among birds this show of sympathy, if indeed it be sympathy, and not merely curiosity or desire to be forewarned of the approach of a common danger.